discussion. What place do oaths play in today's culture? Where do we see them used? And do people place value on them or not? How much value do you think people place on oaths? So just a couple of minutes to discuss that. Okay. Where do we have oaths used today? What are some weddings? Yeah. Court. Yeah. Do doctors still swear the Hippocratic Oath or equivalent? No, you don't. Politicians. Yeah. We all saw Anthony Albanese be sworn in as Prime Minister. So there's that. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But there's a difference though, isn't there, between a promise and an oath, I think, as we'll see in the passage tonight. An oath is kind of binding you to your promise, isn't it? And I guess in terms of like a marriage context, you've got your wedding vows, which are your promises, but in a way, the ring, the exchanging of rings, kind of is like the sealing of that. It's every time you see the ring, it's a reminder of the promise, and that you have to be held to your promise. So it's kind of binding you to that. Yeah. So in that sense, that's an oath that a lot of people today don't really take that seriously, do they? Okay. Well, let's see what our passage says about oaths and promises. If someone could read verses 13 to 20, please, of chapter 6.
For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, "Surely I will bless you and multiply you." And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So this is following on from last week's passage, and that call to maturity, that call to like verse 11, to have the same earnestness, the full assurance of hope. What is the biblical basis that we see for having a sure assurance for our hope, for standing firm, for entering in, for approaching God? And it's based on the certainty of God's promise, which he seals with an oath. And here we see our next type of Abraham. The thing about Abraham that makes him stand out from most of the other key figures through the Old Testament is that Abraham, in some ways you could look at Abraham and you can see how he points to Christ, but he's also used as an example for us. So in a sense, he's in this context here, he's not a type of Jesus, but he's a type of us. Romans 4 and Galatians 3, you both use Abraham as the model for what it means to be justified by faith. And we are to follow Abraham's example. So Abraham, in that sense, points forward, foreshadows those who will be living by faith in Christ. So we see that the promise made to Abraham was sealed with an oath. And we see this in Genesis 22, 15 to 18. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven. This is as Abraham has Isaac on the altar on the top of Mount Moriah, and he's got his knife ready to sacrifice Isaac. And said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So there's the oath. By myself I have sworn. And then he reiterates the promise that he had already given. So we're told that Abraham obtained the promise, verse 15. Thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. What he's saying there is not that he obtained what is promised, because when we get to chapter 11, we'll be told, well, actually Abraham by faith, lived by faith, but never actually ultimately received the promise. It was only after he was dead that his descendants were a great multitude and they were in the land and so on. So what he's saying is the promise was made sure. Abraham obtained the promise.
Wasn't that promise also given before the birth of Isaac?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So this is actually the last. We'll see in a moment. The last in a whole series of God reiterating the promise all the way through Abraham's life. So he's. We'll see it in a moment.
So, but you said he obtained the promise
He-
at this point.
He
Is that
obtained.
because of the oath made it?
Yes. So obtained here doesn't mean he was first given the promise, but it was secured for him. He secured it. He had it guaranteed, I guess. So all the way through Abraham's life, we see, the promise was given back in chapter 12 of Genesis, when God said, "Leave your father's home and go to the land that I will show you." And then all the way through his life, there are all these threats to the promise, things that, humanly speaking, are going to stop the promise from coming to pass. So he arrives in the land, and then in chapter 12 to 13, he's with Lot and says to Lot, "Well, which part do you want?" And Lot takes the best part of the land, and Abram's left with the scratchy bits up in the hills. And God says, "Don't worry, Abraham. Look across. This whole land will belong to you and your descendants." We'll look at the chapter 14 and 15 a little bit later tonight. But there's this constant threats to the promise, and God just keeps reiterating, saying, "Don't worry, Abraham. It's going to come to pass. It's going to come to pass." But then here in 22, it's like the ultimate threat to the promise. The heir, the one through whom the promise is going to come, the seed, is about to be killed. And there's the end of the promise if Isaac dies. God saves Isaac and seals the promise with an oath. And so in that sense, Abraham obtained the promise. There was no shadow of a doubt now that God would be faithful to his promise. So the oath came at the climactic point of Abraham's obedience. It's like that's what God was teaching him all the way through his life. Abraham, are you really going to trust me and out of your faith in me, obey me? And that was the ultimate test, wasn't it? Will you trust me even if your obedience to me means killing your own son? Will you trust that I'll still keep my promise even if that happens? So we're told in verse 16, people swear by something greater than themselves, and all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. And so that's, in a sense, that's what makes an oath different to a promise. You know, so like we were saying in the marriage example, you make a promise, but you seal it with an oath that keeps you accountable. Or you're in court, and I know they give you the choice now, but in the old days you would put your hand on the Bible. And so you are saying, yes, I'm making a promise, but I'm accountable to God. That's the oath part of it. May God judge me if I lie in court. That's the idea. You're sealing your promise by appealing to someone higher than yourself. Obviously, there's no one higher than God, so God swears by himself. But really, that is like saying, well, may I be done in by myself. I would actually be contradicting my own character. And if God contradicts his own character, then he would cease to exist. He wouldn't be God. So the oath was founded on the displayed faithfulness of God. So based on all that God had done over decades and decades of Abraham's life, really that was what God was appealing to, his own character. You know, you can count on me because you've seen what I've done, decade after decade, making sure the promise is secured in the face of all of these threats. So the Abrahamic promise, verse 17, when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath. So if we just think back to this diagram that we saw a few weeks back, the three stages of the promise, the people, your descendants will be a great multitude, which was fulfilled in the nation of Israel. I will give you this land. So when Israel came into the land, that part of the promise was fulfilled. So stages 1 and 2 fulfilled through Moses and through Joshua. But then by the time that Psalm 110 was written, so the time of David or after David, they're still waiting for stage 3 to be fulfilled. So we might forgive the people at that time to say, well, hang on, we're still waiting. It's been a long time now. We've seen stage 1 and 2 fulfilled, but what about stage 3? Has God's unchangeable purpose, has it actually changed? Is God actually keeping the promise that he made to Abraham? Because it doesn't appear to us as if that's what's happening. Is he remaining true to his oath? So these are as verse 17, these are the heirs of the promise. So God says to them, again, he gives another oath. Psalm 110, verses 3 to 4, which we saw in Hebrews 5 to 6. I have sworn and have not changed my mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So there's another oath he makes to those people, Israel in the land, sealing with an oath the promise that they were still waiting to see completed or fulfilled completely.
In this case, the people of Israel
No, because the promise in Psalm 110, the oath is sworn to the Son, this person in Psalm 110 who is the Son. No, but he's making this oath that he's swearing known to the descendants of Abraham. Yes, so the promise to Abraham was sufficient. In fact, if God had just made the promise and left it at that would be sufficient because God is God. But in his kindness, he reinforces that by swearing an oath. He doesn't need to, because really an oath is required for fallible human beings, sinful human beings, because we go back on our promises, and so we need something to bind us. We swear to God or swear to something greater or whatever we do to force us to keep our promises. God doesn't need that, but because of our frailty, our weakness, in his kindness, he seals his promise with an oath. And so even though his promise is trustworthy, for our sake, he gives an oath. So that means the fulfillment of stage 3 of the promise, the blessing to the nations, is as certain as was stages 1 and 2. So 1 and 2 were fulfilled through the Sinai covenant, which was dependent upon the Levite priesthood, the Old Testament covenant. Whereas part 3, we're being told, is going to be fulfilled through another priest of an order without the limitations of the Levitical order. So that's what God is saying to the descendants of Abraham. Yes, part 3 is going to be fulfilled on swearing an oath, but it's not going to be fulfilled in exactly the way that the parts 1 and 2 were through the Sinai covenant. It's going to be fulfilled through the ministry of this new priest, this priest in the order of Melchizedek, and he will make it come to pass. He will fulfill it. So, what are the two things then? Verse 18, so by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we have fled for refuge, might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope we have. The two things in which God cannot lie, the oath made to Abraham and the oath made to the Son. Two things. God doesn't need those two things in order to fulfill his promise, but we in our weakness need to keep receiving this confirmation. If God has sworn an oath by himself, then he cannot be lying. And he does it twice just to make it as solid and as steadfast for us. We could say, what more need God do to give us a sure hope than to swear twice that his promise is going to come to pass? So that gives us then encouragement to hold fast and to draw near. Remember, we saw that idea back in 4 verses 14 and 16. Since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, let us hold fast our confession. And then 4:16, let us then with confidence draw near. So holding fast and drawing near, the certainty of God's promise gives us the basis to have the confidence to do both. So our position is not as the others perceive it. So see how he says, we who have fled for refuge. That word, the words for refuge aren't actually there in the Greek. It's simply the word fled, which often is used in the context of being a refugee. So you've fled to another country to become a refugee, and that's the context in which it's used in other places. I think one other place in the New Testament has this word, but the emphasis is actually fleeing. You're fleeing from something, and I think he's not really saying, emphasising what we've fled to, it's what we've fled from. Right? These are people who are perceived by people to have gone out to have left the temple system, to have fled from Judaism, and they're on the outside. They're refugees, they're outsiders, they're outcasts. So the world sees us in that way. The Jews of the day saw them in that way as the outcasts, the refugees, with no hope or no God in this world. They were no better off than Gentiles as far as their Jewish family and friends and community were concerned. But what are we in reality? Well, we have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us, and we have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain. So the world sees us as outcast refugees, cut off. The Jews would have said, you've cut yourself off from God. You cut yourself off from the holy place. You've lost access to that because you've rejected the priests, the Levitical priests, and the sacrificial system. But he's saying, no, actually, you are the ones who actually have entered in. You've entered into the inner place, the most holy place. And in fact, Jesus has gone in ahead of you. He has prepared the way. He is your forerunner. So it is through Jesus that you have been brought into the presence of God, into the holy place. Okay, so now we're going to dig into what this Melchizedekian priesthood is all about. If it is this priesthood after the order of Melchizedek that is going to bring about the final fulfillment of the promise and bring us into the holy place, then we need to understand a bit of what this is all about. So the background is the story of Melchizedek in Genesis 14 to 15. Let me read this. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboiim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Aramphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of The valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and in his possessions, and went their way. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. After his return from the defeat of Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me my persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal, strap, or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield, your reward shall be very great. Okay, so apart from Psalm 110, that's the only other place in the Old Testament that Melchizedek gets a mention. Does get mentioned in some of the intertestamental literature, like the book of Enoch and a couple of others. And in those books, Melchizedek is treated almost as a kind of an angelic being, not just a man. And that indicates the kind of the mystery that was around who is this Melchizedek. He appears for a moment and then he's gone. Let's just think about a few points of that story to get the context and to understand what was going on in its original setting. So Abraham's reason for pursuing the kings, it's important to see, it was to rescue Lot. So he wasn't doing it as a favour to the kings or the king of Sodom. It was because Lot, his nephew, had been kidnapped, and so he went out to rescue him. King Bera of Sodom comes out to meet him, and what he wants to do is to get back what he sees as his, but he knows, well, his two options, I guess, are to fight Abraham and kill Abraham and get everything back, or to make some kind of deal with Abraham to get his things back. So riding out to meet Abraham isn't necessarily a friendly thing. It's Abraham is coming back down from the north. King of Sodom comes out to confront him to say, well, it's nice that you've recaptured all my people and my goods, but they belong to me. What's going to happen? So the solution is to make a treaty. What that would do then is bind Abraham to acknowledge the king of Sodom as his sovereign. So Abraham was a nomadic herdsman travelling around, and the nomadic people depended upon the good graces of the kings who lived in the walled cities to actually allow them to stay on their land that they ruled over. And so they would enter into these treaties with the kings to say, well, if you let me live on your land and my flocks to graze on your land, then I will help you. If you need to fight your enemies, I'll send my men to help you. So they'd have these kind of treaty arrangements. But the king, being the king, he would basically become the sovereign over these nomadic herdsmen or other people. So Melchizedek, before that can happen, Melchizedek intervenes. He's up there in Salem, up here, before Abraham gets down to Sodom. So he kind of cuts Abraham off, and his meeting Abram is a friendly thing. He's bringing him bread and wine. He's bringing provisions to help Abraham along his way. Some have said, there's a type of Christ there in itself. Bread and wine should make us think of Jesus giving bread and wine to his disciples, possibly. By Abraham receiving these provisions from Melchizedek and receiving the blessing and giving a tithe, Abraham was pledging loyalty, but not to Melchizedek, because Melchizedek is a priest. So he's actually pledging loyalty to God Most High through Melchizedek. So it's not Melchizedek becoming his sovereign, it is God Most High who is his sovereign. So even now, even if he wanted to, Abraham could not enter into a treaty with King Bera of Sodom, because he's sworn to the Lord through Melchizedek, the high priest, the priest. Then he's told, fear not, Abraham. Why would the Lord then come to Abraham and say, do not fear? Abraham's probably thinking, hang on, have I missed a good opportunity here? I could have entered into a treaty with the king of Sodom, and that would have been very beneficial, because it would have given me security to live around the land of Sodom. So maybe Abraham is a bit fearful here that he's made the wrong decision here. But the Lord comes to him and says, do not fear. I am your shield. The word for shield there is the word sovereign. I am your sovereign. And even when it says your reward is great, it's actually literally, I am your sovereign, I am your very great reward. So Abraham was worried he might have lost an opportunity, but the Lord says, don't worry, remember I've made a promise to you about the land and the offspring and the blessing. Don't worry, Abraham, I've got this. I am your king. So the ministry of the historical Melchizedek, what was his purpose? It was to ensure that Abraham remained in the benefits of this promise, the covenant that God had made with him, and not step out of it and go off and start making a covenant with this earthly king. His intervention prevented Abraham, saved Abraham from that wrong treaty, and made sure that he was still under the covering of God himself. So now we've understood a bit about Melchizedek from the Old Testament. Let's see what we're told about him here in chapter 7. So Melchizedek is a type of Christ. And, that's a typo. It should say 6. No, it should say 7. Good, pointed out. One thing's very good at proofreading finding my mistakes. Although you didn't pick it up that I had the wrong newsletter in today's email. Anyway, he's a type of Jesus by similarity. And it's interesting that we're not pointed out anything in which Melchizedek is a type of Jesus by limitation, like we have with all the other types. It's almost as if he's taken Melchizedek and said, well, actually, it's almost like he is the ultimate type. The other types, Moses and Joshua and the others, had all these failings, but there's something about Melchizedek. We can't really find fault with him. He points to Jesus purely by similarity. What are things that we're told about him? That he is king of righteousness. Verse 2. Yep, verse 2. So his name, King Melech, of righteousness, Zedek. Melchizedek literally means king of righteousness. What's the second thing that's pointing forward to Jesus? What is he king of? King of Salem, which means peace. Shalom. So king of peace. And it's interesting that actually other Jewish writers who had talked about Melchizedek had actually already picked up on this. Writers before this had used this reference to Melchizedek's name. So it's as if the writer of Hebrews is just picking up on something that they've probably already heard from the Jews and actually saying, well, yeah, actually that is true. We can look at his name. His name itself points forward to Jesus. We're told that he's without father, mother, or genealogy. Where are we? And what that's a reference to is the absence of any genealogical or historical background that's given to Melchizedek.
Jesus had genealogical background.
Yeah, we'll get to how that points us to Jesus in a moment. So Melchizedek, there's no genealogical info, which is normally expected. If you think of the key people in the Old Testament, there's always genealogies kind of showing, who their father and grandfather and so on were, and then you hear about their descendants, and that was very important to Jews, that what that background, that family tree of that person is. But Melchizedek just kind of appears out of the blue. We're not told who his parents were. So he's not saying Melchizedek literally had no mother or father. He's saying in the story we read, there's no reference to that. And that is a type pointing forward to the divine origin of the Son. Right? So see how he says, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God. So he's not, again, that word resembling brings out the fact this is a figurative thing, this is a type. In the way that Melchizedek, we know nothing about whether he had any parents or not, that resembles the fact that the Jesus' divine nature. He has the Father, obviously, as the divine Son, but he doesn't have a beginning. He doesn't have a mother and father that bring him into existence at a point in time, is the point he's making. But the point of that is unlike the Levitical priests, his priestly status wasn't based on descent within a priestly line, because to be a priest in Israel, you would have to show your family tree to ensure that you are descended from Levi and of the tribe of Levi. But there's this mysterious appointment in the sovereignty of God. It seems like God has just picked this person out of the blue, this pagan king in Salem, and said, right, you're going to be my priest. Bang, here it is, and you're going to come and you're going to do this. And I don't even know what Melchizedek was thinking, but God just sovereignly made himself known to Melchizedek, appointed him as a priest in order to accomplish this particular task with Abraham. The fourth thing is greatness, and this seems to be the one that he really hones in on. The greatness of Melchizedek. And remember, Aaron was a high priest, but in Hebrews, Jesus is called our great high priest. So here's what he's emphasizing here, the greatness of Melchizedek, that points to how, therefore, Jesus is greater than Aaron and all of the Levitical priesthood. How is his greatness shown? Well, it's shown by two actions: receiving tithes. So in Numbers 18 are the instructions for the Levites and the priests to receive tithes from the people of Israel so that they can be provided for and so they can be devoted to serving. And we're told here, aren't we, the lesser blesses the greater. In fact, we haven't read this passage yet, have we? Let's read it, just so we can know what we're talking about. Can someone read verses 4 to 10?
See how great this man was, to whom Abraham, the patriarch, gave a tenth of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office of a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers. So these also are descended from Abraham. But this man, who does not have his descent from him, received tithes from Abraham, and blessed him who had the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In one case, tithes are received by a mortal man, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor, whom Melchizedek took him.
Okay, thanks, Ray. So hopefully as I go through this, it'll make sense now that we've actually read it. So there's this greatness shown by the action of receiving tithes and giving blessing. So Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek. Melchizedek blessed Abraham, and that set up this hierarchy that made Melchizedek greater than Abraham. But then we're told Abraham, see how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils. And that use of that word patriarch is emphasizing the greatness of Abraham. He's the patriarch. He is the father of the nation, of every Israelite. There's no greater man in their story than Abraham, their father. Yet Melchizedek is even greater than Abraham, the patriarch. Then when we think about the Levites therefore were in this higher place than their brothers, their fellow Israelites, because they blessed the people. So Numbers 22 to 27 talks about the Aaronic blessing. That should be Numbers 6, 22 to 27. They blessed the people and they received tithes. So that put them in this level of hierarchy where they were above the Levites. But then he makes the point, although they're also descended from Abraham. So they were greater than their fellow Israelites, but they weren't greater than Abraham. They were still below Abraham. But the word there, descended from Abraham, is actually they were from the loins of Abraham, emphasizing their brotherhood. So what he's actually bringing out is that even though there was this hierarchy within Israel, the Levites and the regular Israelites were really on the same ground. They were brothers. They were both from the loins of Abraham. Abraham was greater than them because he's the patriarch, and Melchizedek is greater still than Abraham. So there's this hierarchy that's been set up where Melchizedek is at the very top. He's this king priest who's above all of them. And so we're told that Levi basically paid tithes through Abraham because Levi was in the loins of Abraham. When Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, he, in a sense, did it on behalf of all of his descendants, both the Levites and the Israelites. Now, he doesn't say it here, but it's kind of implied then that, therefore, the blessing from Melchizedek comes to the Israelites through him blessing Abraham. By blessing Abraham, he's blessing everyone who comes from Abraham. Now, the difference that he's bringing out here then is, the key difference is the Levites, he says, are mortal. Verse 8, in the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. So the Levites are mortal, and they're connected to the law. They have a command in the law about the tithes and the blessing. On the other hand, though, Melchizedek, we're told, is the one of whom it is testified that he lives. He's not mortal, he's immortal, or lives, continues. And he's connected not to the law, but to the promise. Oh, I've skipped ahead too quickly there. So Melchizedek received tithes from the one, verse 6, him who had the promises. So see, there's that link. The Levites are under the law, whereas what's happening through Melchizedek is to do with the promise. That was confirmed by that oath. Okay, let's keep going. We'll just do this next section, then we'll have a break, and then we'll finish off after the break. So what we see then is the inbuilt weakness, limitations of the Levitical system, therefore require a new system to be in place because they are mortal men, and so they cannot bring this final fulfillment of the promise because they're mortal. Verse 11 talks about perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it people received the law, that word for perfection there is teleiosis, which is completion. So it's not talking about a moral perfection, but a completion. So the perfection, the completion of that Abrahamic promise, stage 3 of the promise, if it had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, then what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? So the Levitical priesthood was insufficient to complete the promise, so there needs to be another priesthood. Need for another Melchizedekian priest, as stated in Psalm 110. There needs to be this new priest. Now note, it was out of the Old Covenant context that the need for another priest was established. It was this deliberate inbuilt limitation in the Levitical priesthood that required a new priesthood or another priest. So verse 12 talks about a change in the law. For where there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well, which might grate on us a little bit. A change in the law, how can that be? Isn't God's law unchangeable? Didn't Jesus say, I've come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it? And he said, if anyone changes the law, if anyone doesn't teach the fullness of the law, then they're cursed. Can God's law be changed? But here he's saying it requires a change in the law. But if the law itself states the need of a change, then it's built in. Because it was a deliberate built-in limitation, because the Levitical priesthood had a use-by date, and because of God's oath that said to this person, you are a son, you are my son, and you are this priest in the order of Melchizedek, because that change came from the law itself, then it's not abolishing the law in the sense that we might get bothered about it. Why does there need to be this new system? And why couldn't Jesus just come as a Levitical priest? Well, because he also came as the king. Because he came from the tribe of Judah in order to be a king of the line of David. And so we're told in verses 13 and 14, the ones of whom these things are spoken, Jesus, belonged to another tribe from which no one has ever served at the altar. No Davidic king has also been a priest at the same time. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. So no history of serving at the altar, and nothing in the law permitting or requiring priests from the tribe of Judah. And this might be the point where the writer of Hebrews is answering the objection, remember, of the Essenes, who said, well, hang on, if he's going to be king and priest, then how can you be from two tribes? Therefore, there must be two messiahs. There must be the kingly Messiah and the priestly Messiah, one from the tribe of Judah, one from the tribe of Levi. And so Jesus, therefore, cannot be the Messiah. And this, in a sense, is a rebuttal, an answer to that. No, this is how Jesus can be king and priest in the one person, because his kingly status comes from being from the tribe of Judah. His priestly status comes from this new order of a Melchizedekian priesthood. So really, the Christian faith stands or falls on the validity of Jesus' priesthood, is what he's saying in essence. If we cannot validate Jesus being qualified to be a high priest on our behalf, then the Christian faith doesn't stand, because it doesn't line up with all of the Old Testament scriptures. of what they say about this person being a priest. From verse 15 down to 25. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness, for the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one was made a priest with an oath, by the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you are a priest forever. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. So when he says this becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, he's saying, well, look at Jesus. When you look at Jesus' life and ministry, what you see in him is a priest like Melchizedek. So it's the life, ministry, and death and resurrection of Jesus that shows him to be this Melchizedekian priest, of which Psalm 110 speaks. And he brings out really three bases for Jesus being this Melchizedekian priest, and for each one he also gives an implication for us that if Jesus is this one. The first basis is, he says, by the power of an indestructible life. That was back in, lost my place. Yeah, verse 16, not on the basis of a legal requirement, but by the power of an indestructible life. And he says, and we see that in Psalm 110, where he says, you are a priest forever. He's emphasizing the foreverness of this priest, Melchizedekian priest. So it's, and that's pointing to his divinity as an eternal son. Remember that imagery of no mother, father genealogy pointing to resembling the Son of God. So this indestructible life points to his divinity as the eternal Son. In his divine nature, he's immortal. He's eternal, which we saw back in chapter 7, verse 3. But he also uses this word indestructible, which is an interesting word to use because there are other words in the Greek that he could use if he wanted to just mean endless or going on forever. There are better words to use. He uses this word indestructible, I think, as pointing to his death and resurrection. We see this indestructible life not just in the divine nature of Jesus, but in the fact that when he died, his body was not abandoned to the grave, but he was raised again. His life was indestructible in that sense. So Jesus was indestructible. His life was indestructible, not just because he was the eternal Son, but his resurrection wasn't because he was immortal and he had to come back to life because of his divine immortality. It is because of his perfectly righteous human nature that he was raised from the dead. His resurrection is a sign that he has fulfilled all righteousness. He is the perfect, spotless sacrifice, has completed the work of salvation, therefore he's raised from the dead. What's the implication then of this? We see it in verse 18 to 19. A former commandment is set aside on one hand. The old regulations about Levitical priests is set aside. That now becomes obsolete, no longer needed, because it deliberately had a use by date. It was due to expire at the point that this Melchizedekian priest came along. And on the other hand, a better hope is introduced. A hope that is offered that is better or more complete. Why? Because it's a hope, because it's based on the guarantee now of that third aspect of the Abrahamic promise being fulfilled, and therefore everything being brought to completion. So not a better law, but it's a different kind. Right, it's a change in the law. It's not chucking the law out because it was broken, but it's a different kind of law that enables us to draw near. It is a better hope introduced through which we draw near to God. See, there's that theme coming out again. We who have fled, who have been turfed out, who are the rejects, actually we are the ones through Jesus who can actually draw near to God, come into his presence. Okay, the second basis that he gives in verses 20 to 21. What would you say the basis is in verses 20 to 21? Well, it was that oath again, isn't it? And he says, as it's seen, again, bringing us back to Psalm 110, that verse in Psalm 110, seen in, the Lord has sworn and has not changed his mind. You are a priest forever. What's the implication of this, of the oath that God has made? So he's made the oath to this person in Psalm 110. We now see that person in Psalm 110 is Jesus. Therefore, God has sworn an oath to Jesus. What is the implication of that for us? Verse 22, Jesus is the guarantor of a better covenant. So we have a better hope. Now we have a better covenant, and he is the guarantor of it. So the covenant, there's the promise associated with the covenant. What is the oath, the thing that has sealed God's promise given in the covenant? Well, it's actually Jesus himself, because the oath has been made to Jesus. So he's fulfilled the oath to Abraham in stages 1 and 2, and now he's fulfilling his oath made to the Son in Psalm 110, because now it's through Jesus that the blessing is going to all the nations of the earth. As the gospel is being proclaimed, we are living literally in that the completing of that final stage of the Abrahamic covenant. And Jesus has secured it. He's the guarantor of it. Okay, the third basis, verses 23 to 24, he holds his priesthood permanently by his permanent continuation of his priestly ministry. So his priestly ministry continues. He didn't stop being a priest when he ascended to heaven. Right? He ascended to heaven, is at the right hand of the Father, and is now before the throne of God interceding for us. So his priestly ministry continues. The Levitical priests were temporary, and that's why they were many in number, because of their mortality. So the ministry of any given Levitical priesthood was temporary. It couldn't continue because of death. But Jesus continues forever, which means there's only one priest that's needed, because that one is permanent. He's never going to stop his priestly ministry. Even in the new creation, the new heavens, the new earth, We will still be approaching God the Father through Jesus. He will continue to always be the mediator between us and the Father. We'll always come to the Father through Christ. You know, the pictures in Revelation, people are still worshipping the Lamb who was slain as they're before the throne of God. What's the implication of his permanent priesthood? Verse 25, he is able to save to the uttermost. So in a sense, you could say that the salvation offered by the Levitical priests was limited, wasn't it? Because you come to the priest, he'd offer a sacrifice. Well, that dealt with the sins from the last time I offered a sacrifice to now, but I'm going to have to come back again, and we'll see that in the next chapter, this repeated sacrifices. They could only offer a limited salvation, so to speak. But because his priesthood is permanent and because it continues forever, you could say that his salvation is absolute. That word there, see how there's the word telos? That's the telos, completeness. And pan means everything, all. So it's like it is absolute completeness. You can't get any more complete than the salvation that he provides. So the extent of his salvation corresponds to the fact that he's indestructible, that he continues forever. A way we could translate that verse is that he saves at all times. He will continue to save in terms of keeping us secure and ensuring that we always have access to the Father through him. That will continue forever. He makes intercession. His priestly ministries continues. Eternal life in the new heavens and the new earth will always, as I said, always be through Christ as the mediator, as our priest.